Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode at the Inner Changemaker. And I am really excited to be here with you guys every single week, bringing you some of the very best humans that I could possibly get in touch with. And today's guest is no different. Our guest has dedicated his life to answering a really great question. How do you make business grow? Which I believe evolved into a bigger question, which is how do you help people grow? And in this transition, he's kind of famous for discovering this, which is called the entrepreneurial personality type, EPT. And we are going to dive very deep into that topic. And for the past 2 decades, our guest has curated some proven business philosophies. He started consulting at a very young age. He's worked with Fortune 500 companies, the Global 100 companies. He's always creating such amazing content. He was one of the first people I actually followed on Facebook without actually knowing him. And he's the host of the very new but very awesome podcast called Momentum. And he's going to be releasing a book called Momentum in 2018. So welcome to the show, Mr. Alex Charfen.
Jay, thank you so much for having me, man. And that was an awesome introduction. I appreciate it.
Yeah, that was good. I can send you a copy of it.
We'll take it from myself. When I go speak.
Alex, I mean, I was telling you a little off record. A mutual friend kind of introduced us, and I was a bit intimidated to kind of have you on, and not necessarily because of all the business accolades, but because some of the material that you create, I feel like it's almost like you could see through the entrepreneurial veil or the entrepreneurial kind of mask, right? And you can kind of understand, some of those real pain points. And I know for me, when I started following your content, you're talking about, momentum-based beings and evolutionary hunters. And I remember my thoughts to myself, I was like, oh my God, this guy gets it. I'm not going crazy. I'm not insane. I'm not what my family members tell me I am, right? and I know, I did a little bit of research, and I know that whenever you do talks and whenever you present EPT or any of the stuff that you create, people get that same emotional feeling, right? So I'm curious, first, easy question to start it off. How does that feel for you? Having made that discovery and sharing that with the world the last couple of years, how does it feel on your end to have people, come up to you and be able to share that with you and be like, my goodness, you connected with me in such deep ways that I never thought someone would be able to understand.
Jay, it's one of the most intense feelings in the world. In my past career, I had people come up to me and say, hey, that was a great presentation. And hey, you sold a bunch of stuff. And hey, I've never seen anybody do that well on TV before. And those felt good, but they all almost as an entrepreneur, when somebody tells you you do something well, it's like, hey, I don't need to hear that. I want to know what's really going on.
Yeah.
And when I started sharing the EPT, the type of things that people would tell me changed dramatically. I'll just share one story with you. We put some of our videos online about the Evolutionary Hunter. And, I think we are physiologically sensitive, momentum-based beings, just like you said. And we are highly reactive to constraint. So I look to help people like us remove constraint anywhere they can in their lives. And that includes physiologically, cognitively, chemically. What can we do to create momentum? And so one of the videos we put up was on a couple of biohacks, and people put a lot of really cool comments under there. But the one that was most important to me was a guy who said, and I'll paraphrase, he said, and it was in broken English because he's from another country, but he said, You don't know how much you've changed my life. My dad was a super EPT, so he had identified like crazy. He said, my dad had his first heart attack at 26. He had another one at 29, and then he passed away. And I have to shower 10 to 15 times a day just to feel comfortable. Or so he said 15 to 20 times a day just to feel comfortable. And he had applied 2 of our biohacks, and he said he went from showering 15 to 20 times a day and having shaking, uncontrollable panic attacks to only having to shower 5 times a day. And he said he had had the best month of his life. And when I put out content and I'm expecting business owners to grow their business, and I get a response like that, that's a 75% reduction in the symptoms of OCD without medication. And to me, that is like the most positive thing that could ever happen. And I use that testimonial in my presentations because it's the most important one to me that I've ever gotten on YouTube. Because, that's not somebody saying, hey, great speech or something. They're saying, you profoundly changed my life. And that is like the most intense feeling I've ever had.
Wow. As you guys can see, there's a reason we got Alex Charfen in the house. I'm so excited to have you here. And I mean, it must feel incredible, to be able to really impact, people's lives. Cause I know I'm here in Toronto and we do these monthly kind of meetups all on online marketing, kind of like head heavy. But so many times when we're behind closed doors or at dinners, entrepreneurs are always sharing kind of like the pain, like the real stuff that happens, the real pain of bootstrapping a business and trying to make things happen. I want you to you're the best person to kind of share on this. When did you know you were different? Like, when did you know that you were being driven, by something else? I know you always do this in talks, and you call it, I think, the three awakenings.
Yeah.
But share with us and tell us, when did you know that there's just, you were a little different than maybe some others around you?
Jay, I think part of the reason that I was able to discover or download the entrepreneurial personality type, because I think it was a little bit of both, is because I'm so fundamentally different than most people. And, I've always been ridiculously awkward and socially awkward and different. And when I was a kid, I knew right away when I saw other people that I was different from the rest of the world. I was the kind of kid that adults who would attenuate their voice. They would say, hey, look, it's Jay and Jennifer and Alex. And I knew that. I understood what was going on, but I didn't know why. And so I always had this realization that I was different and that for some reason the systems in the world didn't work for me. I didn't realize there was other people like me. I just felt completely alien and alone because I'd go to school and it felt like everyone else was okay. And I was freaking out and panicking and couldn't stay in the chair and wanted to get up and run around. And I would see other people in social situations and they looked like they could talk to each other really fluidly. And I would think, man, why can't I do that? And for me, it was always like that. And I think that's why I was able to develop this, because as a child, I didn't try to lean into the systems that were there. I started reading obsessively. And here's what happened. Like, this is the first epiphany I had in my life that maybe I wasn't just completely screwed and maybe I wasn't fundamentally broken. Was I went and started reading about this thing called success, and I started reading life stories. And once I started, I couldn't stop. I read biographies and autobiographies and third-party accounts and articles, anything I could find on successful people. And the more that I read, the more that I found was that they were just like me. You read about Socrates, who went to his death because he would not agree with something that was against his principles. Newton was sitting under an apple tree and the apple hit his head and he discovered gravity. But what we don't share with that story is he was completely antisocial, didn't do well with other people. And that's why he was alone under a tree. Einstein was in an algebra class for the second time. He failed the first time, daydreaming. And that's where he started the theory of relativity. And all of those stories started to reinforce for me, like, hey, maybe I'm not completely broken. I'm a lot like these guys. And I went out looking for this thing called success. And the more I read, the more I realized that these incredible people from the past left these shortcuts behind, books and quotes and information and discoveries, to let people like you and I know we are not alone. And that's why that's why I know that I was able to figure out the entrepreneurial personality type. I've been obsessed with this my whole life.
And you just didn't have a name maybe for it or a classification. I mean, at the end of the day, I can even feel the emotion and the passion. I mean, for people that are not watching this, I mean, you can hear it, right, in the intonation and in the voice. I mean, so tell us about how you discovered, I guess, this EPT. Like how did you actually put that together and say, hey, I'm going to present this into the world? Was that intentional? Like, did you sit down and say, hey, I'm going to, craft a name and that we're going to make, we're going to put a TM by it. And you know what I mean? Like there's the marketing mind behind it. And then there's obviously the emotional side behind it as well.
Oh man, I wish it was intentional. In fact, well, let me back up a little bit and I'll share it with you. So I've been obsessed with this my whole life. You can see in the shot that I've got, I've always been surrounded by books. I'm always reading to try and figure out more about human beings. I read about psychology, anthropology, archaeology, sociology. Like, why do we exist like we do? Yeah. And at one point when I was in my 30s, I had this office that had shelves just like this, but instead of books, I had 8.5 by 11 pictures of people who I respected, people who I admired. And I used to stare at the wall and think like, why are they all up there? Why were they able to do what they do? Like I couldn't put it all together. And here's what happened, Jay. A few years ago, I sat down as now I started information marketing in about 2008. And a few years ago, I sat down to write the book that was going to be like my opus. It was called Constructive Company. And it was a book on how to build a company in a way that helps everyone involved. And because that's what I've done and that's what I've helped organizations do. Right. And I got to the part in the book proposal, not even the book, where you write about your client. And I couldn't write 200 words about entrepreneurs. I've spent my whole life studying entrepreneurs, my whole life obsessing over successful people. I've worked with some of the most successful people in the world up close and personal. And I couldn't describe entrepreneurs. It was driving me crazy. It was a weekend. Right. And I remember getting up and walking around my house and thinking like, what is wrong? Why can't I just put out 200 words on what's an entrepreneur? Yeah. And I went for a walk. I went and got water. I came back. I sat down and it was this crazy experience. Like all the highways in my head that were disparate and going in different directions, like all joined together. And it was like this very clear vision of who we are. And I remember thinking, we're all alike. And I had this like crazy experience where I sat down and I wrote over 25,000 words in a weekend. And Jay, it surprised me just as much as everybody else because I was reading it and as I wrote, I was overcome with emotion over and over again because I was writing the manifesto on who I was. And I remember thinking, like, I wonder if this will have any effect on anybody else besides me. And 2 days later, we went out to lunch with my publicist, Dennis Welch, who's a close friend of mine. And I said, Dennis, I'm working on some stuff. I want to share it with you. Yeah, and I like looked down at some notes and I started telling him about it. And I wasn't looking up. I was just like reading off my notes. And I looked up and he had tears in his eyes. Yeah. And he said, Alex, nobody's ever said anything like that before. I've never heard anything like it. I've been in publishing for 40 years. No one's ever shared who I am in such a profound way. And I thought like, oh, wow, this might work. And here's the challenge. You said, did you sit down and TM it? And Jay, I didn't do this to make a product. I've built products my whole life. I've consulted with some of the largest product organizations in the world. My first information product that Katie and I put together did 70 million. And this was the opposite. This was a framework, a description of a person, a body of content that when I went out and shared it, this is Jason Fladlin, who runs Rapid Crush. He's the CEO of that company. He said, he gave me this compliment that stuck with me. He said, Alex, you don't understand how good your information is because you're the first speaker I've ever seen that in 1 hour changes an audience's behavior. You don't enlighten them. You don't show them things. You change their behavior. Yeah. And I remember thinking like, that's what I've always wanted to do. But anyone who's followed me for the past couple of years has known that like from the marketing standpoint, it's been confused. We haven't figured out how to monetize it, how to make a consistent effect, how to make a consistent outcome until very recently. And I think that's because this is something I've been working on since I was about 8 years old. And I didn't really put it together to sell stuff. And now that we've realized, I went and did, what every marketer does. I asked my clients like what they wanted from us and what they were looking for, where we could help them. And so finally, we're creating that consistent effect. But to be absolutely candid with you, I've spoken on some of the biggest stages. I've shared this with hundreds of thousands of people. We couldn't figure out what product was behind it. So the number of people who know EPT is massive. We're finally getting it to the point where now we have an answer for those people that have come towards us.
Yeah. And it's so powerful, right? Like as you're telling us this, and I mean, I could just see that you're getting emotional talking about it, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that day it was like a religious experience. It was like, oh God, I get emotional when I think about it, because my whole life, I've had a lot of friends who are very faithful. They have a faith. They believe in a religion. They believe in a higher power, a higher calling. And that was always absent in my life. And it wasn't that I didn't believe that there was a higher power, but I just never had that connection to an organized religion. And that weekend, when I sat down and I wrote the entrepreneurial personality type, I know this sounds crazy, but it felt like every entrepreneur I had read about in history was right there with me. And as I put the words down on paper, I remember like going back and reading them, and they affected me like I was reading them for the first time. And I know that might sound kind of crazy, but when I went out and started sharing the information with people, like I've never had an entrepreneur say, hey, I think you're off a little bit, or hey, I don't think that's really true. I mean, all of them just declare it as truth and then ask what's next. And I think that, I can't take responsibility for that. I think that there was some divine intervention. There was some help there. I felt it that day.
I remember reading your About Me page, I think, or your bio. I found your bio somewhere. And I think the first couple sentences was you're part of a special band of brothers and sisters. And then you listed like Oprah, Einstein, a special band, I'm paraphrasing here, band of brothers and sisters that include Einstein, Oprah, all this. And I was like, oh, Alex is related to Oprah? First thought. I was like, oh, that's going to be so interesting. But then I understood what you meant, which was, we were all humans, but we were connected, by this EPT. We were connected by this personality type. And a lot of times it's misunderstood. And a lot of times people don't know where they fit in, or if they fit in at all, right? And they wonder what's wrong with them because they don't fit in at school. They're the black sheep in their family. And I know for me, like, and it rings true for just every other entrepreneur I talk about. Tell us about maybe some of the, I guess, maybe misconceptions of EPTs, and maybe what are some of the characteristics that when people that are listening to this, that are vibing with this, they go, wow, like, I understand.
Jay, I think the easiest way to do that is to allow you with your audience to self-qualify as an EPT. Is that okay?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So there's four types of people in the world. I've studied human beings extensively because they confuse me.
Okay.
And so I want to show you like who everybody else is and who we are. And that's going to explain why we're so misunderstood.
Okay.
So the first group of people in the world, and you can qualify one of these if you know which one you are. The first group is, I call them the caretakers. Okay. These are the human beings that like to take care of other people. And what happens is a lot of entrepreneurs, especially like you, they immediately say, well, that might be me. Right. But here's the question.
I just had that thought, but go on.
Right. And so here's the disqualifier. Jay, do you like changing bedpans?
No.
You laugh, but you know what's crazy? I've been in a room with a person and they've changed a bedpan, and I've said, hey, do you like changing that bedpan? And they've looked at me like directly and honestly and transparently and totally congruent. And they say something like, well, if that person needed the bedpan changed and I was here to change it, I feel fulfilled. I served my purpose. And I'm like, holy shit, I want to write a check.
Yeah.
But for them, like, that's what they want to do. And caretakers like the act of taking care of other people. So you're not a caretaker.
Okay.
So the second group, but now if we think, evolutionarily, if we think did the tribe need that group of people? Absolutely. Like the human tribe needed a big population that was willing to take care of other people.
Of course.
Now, the second group is the communicators. Now, often when I'm talking to somebody like you, they go, oh, that must be me. Because the communicators are the ones who like to communicate.
Yeah.
But they like to communicate about anything. And I can disqualify you with one question. Jay, do you enjoy small talk?
Alex, what about that local sports team that we love talking about so much?
Right. Did you see the game last night? Like, right. Well, and here's what's interesting, Jay. When you look at communicators, they love small talk. In fact, you get two communicators together and they will talk for 45 minutes about a half-hour TV show. How does that even happen? But people like us, like there's no way we would even think about that. But our evolutionary tribe needed the population willing to talk about anything, because they would say, don't eat this, you'll die. Don't go over there, there's a woolly mammoth. Be careful over here. We needed the people who would carry on oral tradition.
Yeah.
So you're not a communicator. Now, the third group, I call them the coordinators. Now, the coordinators, really, their code name is the organizers and the memorizers. Now, these are the people who love details. They love fine print. They love contracts, not because there's a deal, but because there's a contract. You're not one of these, right? And the disqualification question for everyone listening is, how many committees have you voluntarily put yourself on? Because how many, Jay?
Yeah, like 0, like -3, maybe. Take it out of somehow.
Coordinators, they love it. Coordinators get into it. Like sometimes you talk to a coordinator and they'll actually proudly tell you, well, I sit on 26 committees. I'm like, holy crap, I would shoot myself. I mean, I've been in a committee one time because I accidentally volunteered, and it was like the longest hour of my life, the first meeting I ever went to. And so you're not a coordinator. But did the evolutionary tribe need those people? Sure. We needed people who remembered the seasons, who made sure we put away food for the winter, who remembered and organized.
Yes.
Now, if we look at our evolutionary tribe and we have the people who take care of people, the people who communicate oral tradition, and the people who organize and memorize and coordinate, what are we missing? You already know this.
Yeah.
It's the evolutionary hunter.
Right.
And what we're missing is the small percentage of the tribe of people willing to get up every day and accept the vulnerability and exposure of saying, I'm going to go do something new. I'm going to go kill something. I'm going to keep this tribe alive. And when you look at the difference here, this is why it's so profound. And I want to just confirm everyone's suspicion who's listening, who just identified with Evolutionary Hunter. 1, you're an entrepreneurial personality type. Welcome to the most important club in history. And 2, I want you to know that there's a reason why there's factions within each one of those groups that actively work against us. Because when you look at a coordinator, a communicator, or a caretaker, they live in the present. They strive for average. They struggle to maintain the status quo. They don't want things to change. And evolutionary hunters are the small population in society that gets up every day, and we are hardwired to say, how do we change this? How do we make it better? How do we contribute in a bigger way? And how do we break everything and rebuild it? And when you look at how we are hardwired, we literally offend and terrify a big percentage of the rest of the population. And that's why people like us have experienced throughout our lives judgment and isolation and the feeling of being completely alone. Because when you're in school, the kids who move around too much, ask too many questions, want to change things, want to make things better, want to improve the process, are not respected. In fact, we're separated, told to sit still, and made to feel like we're alone. And so for everyone listening, here's what I want you to do. Take a deep breath and think of the timeline that you remember of history. Think of the people you remember who have existed at any point in time. Anyone who matters to you, anyone who matters to be remembered. And I know who they were for me. I remember feeling the inspiration of thinking that Socrates and Aristotle and Plato just sat in a room and answered questions all day. And I remember thinking that Pythagoras believed so much in his convictions that he went to his death because he said there's a better way. I remember reading about Da Vinci sneaking into morgues to draw human beings because he was so curious about what was going on. And I want you to remember anyone today or from the past who matters to be remembered because that is your club. And that is who you are. And for so many of us, we've become separated from that feeling of being an evolutionary hunter. And what I want you to do is right now, accept who you are and understand that you are part of the most important club in history. And it doesn't matter what diagnosis or disability or disorder or whatever somebody has told you or said. The fact is that someone just like us in history has dealt with it, overcome it, and gone on to change the world. So my contention, my belief, and my edict is there is nothing wrong with you, and you are not alone.
Alex, I think I can stop podcasting. I mean, that was it. We found the answer, ladies and gentlemen, of what we're looking for. I mean, wow. I think for people that are listening and watching this, I mean, make sure to go follow Alex Charfen. He was really the first person that I didn't know. You know, like those people that are like, you need to follow on Facebook. Like, you're really the first person. I clicked follow, and then after a few videos, like, I'm gonna friend him, see if he friends me back. Like, it was kind of weird, you know? Like, and like people do that to me, and it's like, it's kind of weird. But I was like, man, and I followed him because of this. And I know for so many people that are listening right now, whatever they're doing, you know, at work or they're watching this, I mean, you know, you that's why, you know, there's nothing wrong with you. That's why you're pushing all the time. That's why you can't turn it off, you know? Yeah. That's why you only know go and moving forward, right? I'd love for you to also tell us a little bit about, I remember for me, one of the most profound things that you told me, that entrepreneurs are actually not happy or sad.
Right.
And then I was like, wait a second, I'm in personal development. Like, we kind of sell, you know, positivity and confidence here. What do you mean, Alex? What do you mean that we're not happy or sad? And it's like, am I emotionless, right? Am I indifferent? I know some people think like, oh, I'm just cold, you know?
Well, I know that your whole life, Jay, you've been told you don't feel right. And here's what it sounded like. Nobody ever said, hey, Jay, you don't feel right. But here's what they said. They said, Jay, stop moving. Stop asking questions. Stop being so excited. Be more excited. Slow down. Speed up. Hey, you're making everyone else uncomfortable. Have you heard that stuff?
Yeah.
And you've probably heard questions like, Jay, can you just tell us all how you're feeling? Like, admit it. Yeah. That feels like a pop quiz you weren't prepared for. Yeah. Because whenever somebody asks me that, I'm like, I don't know what to say. And as a kid, I was put in front of that poster multiple times. The poster that says at the top, how are you feeling today? Yeah. And then it's got all the faces. Yeah. And it's like confused, sad, happy, frustrated, all that crap. And I realized as a kid that if I just said sleepy, lower right-hand corner, they would leave me alone. Because anything else caused further discussion about emotions, which I didn't really want to have the discussion because people like us really don't understand the difference. And now here's what I want everyone to know. I know you understand happy or sad. Here's how you understand it. Happy's on and sad is off. Mm-hmm. It's binary. Yeah. But tell me the difference between sad, frustrated, pissed off, ticked off, confused, upset, and just plain not going to talk to you. For people like us, there is no difference.
Right.
But there's other people out there who will argue to the death that there's a difference between each one of those. And the fact is, we don't live in this world of emotions. Evolutionary hunters are not hardwired to have emotions. We're called cold, heartless, cutthroat, all kinds of things throughout our lives. Obsessive, antisocial, and all kinds of other stuff. Why? Because we're hardwired to keep this tribe alive. We only recognize one feeling: momentum. We're either in it or we're not. Mm. And when you look at how we exist, there's hundreds of emotional descriptors. But the fact is, for us, it's three things. One, we're in momentum. So there's three states. When you're in momentum, it's when things are going your way, when you're achieving, when you're accomplishing, when you're making things happen. Jay, when you are in momentum, what does it feel like for you?
Superhuman. I always say when you have momentum, like go, like, because you can do anything. You can literally do the impossible. Right?
Would you say that when you're in momentum, you're physically boosted?
Yes. It's like a drink, you know, 2 Americanos and I'm like good to go. But I didn't do anything, right?
And can you think better? You actually are cognitively boosted. You make decisions better?
Yeah.
And the third one is, this is the big one. When you're in momentum, are you chemically boosted?
It feels like it.
Yeah, there's no question, man. We get into a dopamine cycle or an adrenaline cycle, and we are chemically boosted. And so when you look at the evolutionary hunter in our species, doesn't it make sense that we would be physiologically, cognitively, and chemically boosted when we are on the hunt? Right?
Yes, of course.
And here's what happens. For people like us, as we approach a goal, it loses importance to us. Why? Because evolutionary hunters couldn't celebrate a kill. We had to go out and kill again to keep the tribe alive.
Yeah.
And so that's our first state. It's momentum. The second state is when we're facing resistance. And now this is that strange time in our lives where we don't have enough resources. We don't have enough time. We don't have what we should. And the whole world is saying like, hey, you're not going to make it. And you see a tiny light at the end of the tunnel and everyone around you is like, it's a train. But you lean in, you go towards the light, you make it bigger, and you step through the end. And you know what happens? When we face resistance, we create momentum, just like an evolutionary hunter would. And the third state, this is the one we have to be so careful of, because people like us can look disordered and diagnosable, and like we have all kinds of epidemiology that they now call all different names, which are really labels for an evolutionary hunter in Constraint. And we can be symptomatic, we can look crazy, we can scare the people around us, because when we are in the third state, full Constraint, it's when you're in the state I just described, but you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. It's when you don't see a way out. When the system, the people around you, the authority around you is holding you in place. Jay, have you been there?
Yeah.
I've been there.
Yeah.
Here's what I know. Physically, how fast do you break down? How fast does your body start feeling tired?
like it's like you start tired almost.
Yep. And cognitively, do you think as well? Or are you like confused, brain fog, frustrated?
Yeah.
And then here's the big one. Chemically, are you affected?
Feels like it. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and you know what? We can test for it, because what happens is you put an entrepreneur in full Constraint, you hold one of us in place, and we are evolutionary hunters. We are programmed to be on the hunt. And when we get into that place where we're held in place, everything that makes us talented, everything that makes us create outcomes in the world, everything that helps us be who we are works against us. Our ability to make unique connections becomes we can't see the forest for the trees. Our innate motivation, where we can't turn it off, becomes the engine that just spins in your head and you feel like you're not going anywhere. Our ability to, our high sensitivities and our ability to see things that other people don't see becomes so loud and so overwhelming that colors yell at you. The world gets overwhelming. And that's what happens when we're in Constraint. So one of the big challenges with how the rest of the world exists is that they tell us we should pursue these things like happiness and joy and all this other stuff. You know what we really should pursue? Being on the hunt. Because you look at any entrepreneur who's happy, you look at any entrepreneur who's in joy or ecstatic or any of those things. Yeah. Here's the condition that's present. They are achieving, they are accomplishing, and they are making things happen.
And I absolutely love these distinctions, and I love the way that you put it. I'm just looking, and in this episode, I can't even believe that we've talked for this long, because it kind of feels like a bit of a spiritual journey for me. Like there's been goosebumps, and for people that are listening and watching this, make sure to go follow Alex Charfen and any of the social media channels. Make sure to go check out the Momentum podcast, because some of this content, I think, like for me, if I would have heard this a little while, like a few years back, it would have made a dramatic difference. But I think intuitively we know what, feels great, and we know what doesn't feel great. Right. And we try to justify all the things that don't feel great to ourselves logically, maybe to our parents. And I really relate with some of the stuff you say, because I know growing up as a kid, you're diagnosed, I don't even know, ADD, ADHD, traditional Asian parents, right? Like teachers, like, I don't know what's wrong with your kid. He's constantly like bouncing out like a bouncy ball everywhere, right? Like my parents are bringing me, because they didn't either know, and I don't necessarily put them at blame, right? Because, they learn from their parents, and there's a certain tradition there in terms of being able to sit quiet and being in order and, wanting to aspire to like math and accounting and and I'm not to be a hater on if you're an accountant. I love accountants, talking to them if it's about like my stuff and any of the, business things. But, I didn't aspire to be like that. Right. So, I heavily resonate with some of the things you said. But Alex, what do people do? Like if they're hearing this for the first time, they go, you know what? I'm an EPT. I'm a hunter. They know that they need to be in motion, but they're not. They're whatever, I'm sure some of their excuses are totally valid, right? Maybe they're doing something they don't like. What do they do to create that momentum?
That's a great question, Jay, because that was my question that I set out to answer by studying successful people. And so much of my life, I felt that third state, that place of full constraint. I remember being in school and getting in trouble for moving around and locking my legs underneath the chair so that I would literally like lock myself into the chair, cross my legs underneath. Both of my feet still have like the pinky toes are pushed into my feet. They didn't develop correctly because I spent so much time as a kid doing that. And I know how it feels to be in a job you don't want, a position you don't want, a relationship you don't want, to be in a situation you don't want. And here's what every successful entrepreneur in history did. See, what happens is when you read 10 biographies, they all look different. When you read 100, you start to see some similarities, but they still look like magic tricks. It all looks different. Like you start reading 1,000, 2,000, 10,000 and keep going. You start seeing these clear patterns and these clear paths to success. And I have a 4-part equation that works for any one of us to create our greatest contribution and to go and create the outcome you want in the world. And I want to make something clear. I know that this podcast is very focused on legacy over currency. Yeah. And I understand that. But I want to make something clear about the contribution equation that I'm about to share with you. I have a different view of the world. When I look at contribution, here's what I see. Capital flows to the greatest contribution. The people making the biggest change, the biggest impact, the biggest awarenesses, the ones who are sharing most vulnerably, exposing themselves, the ones who are on stage, taking the criticism, the ones who are building empires that employ tens of thousands of people and change the world are also the ones who take the most pressure and the most condemnation from the world. And here's what I found in every successful entrepreneur's life. There was a 4-step process that they followed. The first step is lower the pressure and noise in your life. We're evolutionary hunters. Our awareness and our ability to be present is everything. We are that small subset of the population that goes into the future, imagines a new condition, comes back to the present, and demands it become real. And in order to do that, you have to lower the pressure and noise in your life. That means get the people and places and things that are taking momentum away out of your life. And it's binary. They're either giving you momentum or they're taking it away. And be ruthless. If your outcome in this world matters to you, don't let anything in that takes momentum away. And it doesn't matter who or what it is, get rid of it. And then the second part of lowering pressure and noise is treat yourself like a professional athlete. You are an evolutionary hunter and you should look like one. Move and drink and hydrate and eat the right foods. We are far more sensitive than the rest of the population. Let them eat all the processed garbage and everything else that's out there. Go eat real foods, exercise, start hydrating like crazy. Put yourself on a path to being mind-body connected, to making that your unfair advantage. When you lower pressure and noise in that way, you can't help but start creating momentum. And there's 2 ways to do it. You can try all you want to go forward. But if you just drop the anchors in your life, momentum will occur naturally. The second step, and this is a hard one for us, we lower pressure and noise. The second step is we have to ask for and offer protection and support. And here's what I mean by that. As entrepreneurs, we have strengths and skills that should be protected, and everywhere else we need support. And so we have to develop the ability to transparently ask for help. And I call it the entrepreneur's dilemma. We need far more protection and support than the average person in order to reach our full outcomes, our full potential. but any request for protection and support makes us feel vulnerable and exposed. Is that fair, Jay?
I mean, when you say it like that, it kind of seems like it's a little weird and a little bit ironic, but it's absolutely true. You know,
It's true.
Everybody does it because they think they're a superstar, but then you can't be a superstar without people helping you. You can't be a superhero at the thing that you do best.
Every billionaire that I ever met, what I really met was an incredible team. And when you create the protection and support around you so that you can go create massive outcomes in the world, that's where everything changes. And here's the key. The hardest part about it is that you have to be transparent and tell people where you really are, because fake it until you make it is really just lie and deny. And unless we go and tell people, here's where I am, this is what I need, this is where I'm stuck, this is what's happening for me, that's where we get the true support and help. And the fact is that if you tell the wrong person what's going on, you're not going to get help. But if you go to an entrepreneur, someone like us, a member of our tribe, and you say, I'm stuck and here's why, you are going to get help, because we are hardwired to hunt together and we all go forward faster together. And so the first step is lower pressure and noise. The second one is increase, ask for, offer protection and support. And isn't that interesting how as I lower pressure and noise, I can help more. And as I lower in pressure and noise, I can realize where I need help more. And the third step is interesting because if you lower pressure and noise and you increase protection and support, your strengths and abilities just start to show. And you get better at what you do. And you figure out who you really are, and you start understanding the massive impact you can have in the world. You know, it's interesting. Every billionaire I've ever met is either dyslexic, dysmorphic, dysgraphic, or something. And 100% of them have been diagnosed just like I have with ADD, ADHD, bipolar depression, mania, any one of the big ones. I've got ADD, ADHD, Asperger's, and autism. So if you don't have 4 aces, I'm ahead of you. And most of my billionaire friends do too. And so how is it somebody like Richard Branson that can't read a menu owns his own island where a helicopter takes off and takes pictures of him kite surfing and it becomes front page news? Because if you lower pressure and noise and you increase protection and support, your strengths and abilities show, and the people are there to fly the helicopter, and you can do the kite surfing and you can look like you have it all because you literally do.
Yeah.
And if the fourth step is, if you lower pressure and noise and increase protection and support, your strengths and abilities show, and you can make your greatest contribution. And every one of us at our core wants to make a contribution. Every entrepreneur I've ever worked with who had the goal of buying a Ferrari, by the time that they were capable of buying that car, they had moved on to something much more important. And the entrepreneurs who make the greatest outcomes in the world are those who are driven to contribute, to help the people around them, to improve the situation for everyone, and to make this world a better place. Yeah. And when I look at the history of entrepreneurship, everyone who's ever created a massive organization that we remembered at their core wanted to do exactly that. And so for anyone listening, if you're stuck, if you're in constraint, if you're feeling like you can't go forward, do these things. Lower pressure and noise. Start taking care of yourself immediately. Declare you're the most important person in the world because you are to you. And increase protection and support. Be honest with people. Start telling them today what's really going on, and you will find momentum comes to you naturally. And when it comes to strengths and abilities, lower pressure and noise, increase protection and support, they will be there. Trust it. And then you can make your greatest contribution. And if you want any more confirmation, read any theology, because I've read them all. I didn't have that elusive quality called faith. So I read every book of every theology because I wanted to understand if any one of them was for me. And it doesn't matter which one you look at. They tell you the contribution equation is real. You hear it in take care of yourself and in the word of wisdom and in honor thyself, honor thy body. You hear protection and support in cause communities, take care of each other, treat each other like you want to be treated. They know your skills and abilities will show because they say, if you do these things, you will be gifted. You will be able to create what you want. You will give to the people around you. And it's all about contribution, because if you do those things, you can make the outcome you want in the world. And anyone can use this starting right now to change their entire lives.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, I mean, please, please, please start writing. I mean, I was taking notes during this whole episode, like, and you have to, anybody can do number one in terms of lowering pressure and noise, right? It doesn't matter if you're an entrepreneur, non-entrepreneur, business, like, it doesn't really matter. And I love that you point this out. I don't think I mentioned this, but a few years ago, I worked with Dan Sullivan. Actually, when I came right out of business school, I went to Strategic Coach, and I got referred in. And Dan, I think you're probably familiar with Strategic Coach. They're kind of like they coach and do training for high net worth individuals. And I always thought it was kind of weird. I was like, well, these guys are making 8-9 figure, entrepreneurs. Like, what do they need coaching on? Like, they shouldn't, like, it's a room of like crazy, 1% entrepreneurs already. And Dan would be a living example of the idea of unique ability, right? Which is only you being in control and doing what you're a genius at. Right. And I remember Dan would say all the time, he goes, I don't know what's happening in the marketing department. I'm not too concerned with what's happening in this department, because Dan's gift was in coaching and was in creating. Right. And he had this team around him. And it was kind of like crazy to see, because looking back, you just thought, oh, Dan's living the life. He has a driver, he has a chef, like, he's not dealing with any of these things that like I have to deal with. But I think what he put, like, as I've gone on this journey, I've realized that, he really put a lot of importance in that unique ability side of things, and you operating, and that's how he was able to contribute the best. Right. And so I think anyone who raises their hand and, resonated with anything Alex had to say, it's absolutely paramount that you guys start this process in lowering pressure and noise, and at least asking for protection and increasing that. So I appreciate you for sharing that. I'd like to add, by the way, I also use your momentum planning system.
Nice.
Yeah, and I don't know why I didn't bring it up, but I think for people, we don't have time to touch on it today, but for people that, if you resonate with this, heavily recommend that as well. Very, very tactical tool. Takes like, less than 10 minutes if you want, every day, any night. And it just gives a great way for you to actually build some momentum on a daily basis. Alex, before we wrap up, I got a couple questions here. It's been such an awesome, such an awesome podcast. For people that are maybe, I know you run like a Facebook group as well. Where do you point people to? Like, where they can kind of like socially stalk you, kind of like I did in the beginning?
There's a couple of places. Well, following me on my personal page is always easiest, because a lot of stuff goes there on Facebook. Yeah. But we have a group called The Optimized Entrepreneur, and it's all about lowering pressure and noise, increasing protection and support. You can join that group. And then go to the Momentum Podcast on iTunes, of course. And then anybody who's interested in learning more about the entrepreneurial personality type, we give that book away. If you go to freemomentumbook.com, you'll get the full argument, including the attributes that make us successful, the details around the contribution equation, really how we see the world, and a lot deeper on the Evolutionary Hunter. And that book's only 9,000 words. It's about a quarter of a normal book. But I've had people tell me so many times that just reading that book has made them feel understood for the first time in their lives. So I would love for anyone listening to download that, read it, and then let me know what you think.
Yeah. And seriously, if you guys have any takeaways or ideas, I know for me, that was a great book. I had it on my phone. I switched phones recently, so it was on my old phone, but I had it, like, it was one of the only books I didn't take off. That and The Four Agreements, Don Miguel Ruiz. So Alex, last question.
That's a good company to be in.
Yeah, I mean, those are some. It's like books that you have to reference. Like it falls into that category. So once again, appreciate you being on here, Alex. Last question for you. The name of the show, it's called Inner Changemaker. When you think of Changemaker, what images or what kind of words come to mind for you?
I didn't only read about successful people who were able to change the world. In my professional career, I had the privilege of being up close and personal with people and watching how they interacted and seeing how they existed. And when I think of the people who truly have changed the trajectory of history and have gone on to do incredible things and have left their dent in the universe, I think of someone who's present and aware. And when I think of changemaker, I think of someone who is vulnerable enough to understand that there's nothing wrong with them and they can share who they are, and present and aware enough to see the world around them and know where they can affect a change. And the contribution equation will put you there. Our systems are all about creating presence and awareness so that you can grow your business. We help people take, $1 million companies and scale them to 10 and 20 and 30 million. Yeah. And where we focus is on presence and awareness. And so anyone who has that aspiration to be a change maker, well, here's what I want to, I'll just speak directly to anyone listening. If your mind is pregnant with the question, can I do this? I want to confirm for you that the answer is hell yes, because anyone in history who has experienced that question did so because there was a divine purpose for you to get up, lower pressure and noise, increase protection and support, allow your strengths and abilities to show, and go make your greatest contribution, because entrepreneurs are the most important people in history, because we are the only source of positive human evolution, and we always will be. So you have a responsibility to me, to Jay, and to your tribe to go make it happen.
Absolutely love it. And I want to just take, a few seconds and, commend you for embodying that, for being present with us in this last hour and being aware to the point that, thousands and millions of entrepreneurs feel understood. And that's a really rare thing. And it's just a rare trait to see. And we appreciate everything that you are, Alex, and the work that you do. And it's been an absolute honor and a pleasure to have you on here. We'll maybe have to have you on here again when you come out with the new book and called Momentum. But I hope people take you up on some of those resources. At least go get the free book and start becoming more present and aware so that they can be better leaders and become the most effective person in their lives. Alex, thank you so much, man. It's just been—
Jay, this is one of the best interviews I've done. And I appreciate the preparation that you did and how much you followed my stuff. And I feel flattered and confirmed with how you ask questions and how we went through this. And I just want to tell you, I love you, brother, and thank you.
So much love for you, Alex. Really, absolute honor. And for you guys that are watching and listening still, take action on this, because it's not— it always shocks me where I'm at, when I began 2 years ago to where I am now. And I always say, podcasting it's just been one of those greatest life hacks and business hacks. And I know you just launched, your podcast, but it's just amazing to be in momentum, in motion, and getting a chance to connect. It doesn't matter if you can't hire Alex and you don't have a $1 million business that he's going to help you turn into 10 million. It's not about that, right? It's about those things that he mentioned: lowering pressure and noise, increasing and asking for protection, stepping into your unique ability, your strengths, and finding a way to contribute. And it's just been so awesome to do this episode for you guys. I'm going to stop the podcast right after this episode because Alex answered all the questions.
Well, you got to keep going, Jay, because I feel a round two coming on.
I know. Yeah. We got to save this for round two. So can't wait to see you guys until the next episode.